Well, it's great to see all of you. If we haven't met, my name is Blake Shook. I'm a been a beekeeper since I was about 12. I started with 2 hives in my backyard and run a little over 30,000 beehives now. And so I love creating videos and content and doing these webinars where I get to hopefully prevent you from making some of the same mistakes that I have over the years. So that's always my goal, is to take all the lessons I've learned running 2 hives all the way to 30,000 and boil that down into practical tips for you as a smaller scale beekeeper. So that's one of my passions. That's what I love to do. I love being able to do these monthly buzz sessions where I get to talk about what you need to be doing in your bees right now to keep them healthy as we broach whatever season we're currently in. And a lot of times the advice I'm giving are the things, well, almost always are the things that I'm doing in my own beehives. Sometimes I'm doing it at a much larger scale, or sometimes not. If I'm managing the bees in one of our local store apiaries, or bees in on my own property, then yeah, sometimes I am just working 2 or 3 beehives. So anyway, thank you for jumping on. Thanks for spending the time. Let's dive right in. We've got a lot of great material to cover tonight. Bees are available, so if you need bees for 2025, now's the perfect time to get those pre-orders in. If you want to get the early dates, which everyone always wants, now's the time to get in and book them. A lot of our earliest dates at a lot of our store locations are already getting pretty full or completely full. So now's the best time to order those bees for 2025. Global pollen patties, we're going to talk about it later on tonight, but a lot of the country is really warm and really dry. Not a great combination for nutrients and nutrition. So, pollen patties are still important, even though we're getting late into the year. So, we'll be talking more about that a lot more later on in the presentation, how we need to manage dearth and drought going into winter, which is right when I really don't want to see it. So, but for now, Sherry, let me turn it over to you and let you jump in and talk about the TBS monthly topics. So good to see you, Sherry.
Good to see everybody. Oh my gosh, y'all, November. Our bees are kind of going, "Phew, we're past the heat and we've got a little bit of rain. I don't know about the rest of the world, but we've had some drought conditions for the last few months. So we've seen a little bit of, I think like 3 something inches over the last couple of, few days, week or so. And our bees are just loving it. Things are perking up. So let's talk about November's topics. I've listed them out here by week. Week 1, which is already up on the website, and I put a little diagram here for you where you can see what to look for in case y'all don't know. On our website, under TBS monthly articles, in the know, if you're not getting these by email, then you need to put your email in there. Otherwise, the rest of you kind of have gotten on this train that we're on. So we're publishing an article, 2 articles a week on the website, and we're also emailing those to you once a week. So the first week, Yellow-Legged Hornet update by Lynn Jones. I'm going to talk to you more about that here in a minute. And storing equipment and drone comb over winter, both of those really good articles. Week 2, what should I do when a cold front's coming? Should I insulate my hives? Boy, if I had a dime for every time I answered that question. And moving bees in cold weather. I can tell you all 4 of those articles are on the website right now. You'll be getting, those that are signed up and those that are about to sign up, you're going to be getting the email for week 2 here in just a few days. So watch for that. Week 3, we're going to do 5 tests to gauge winter bee health and why are there dead bees and pupa in front of my hive. And boy, that's a sad moment, but it goes into great detail about what could be going on. Week 4, can I feed my honey back to my bees? And boy, that's a $1 million question too, that we all want to know, right? Taking notes in the bee yard. And I love this because we all have a different way we do it. And I enjoy getting to see different people's opinions on how that goes. Plus, we do a wrap-up email on all articles, usually at the first end of the month or first of the following month. So you'll see them all kind of come together and be put out there for you. But keep an eye on the website because we're putting those on almost every other day. So really watch and get in there and start reading, because that's your food to get you through winter. And I kind of meant that funny. All right. So Blake, if you'll flip it over to the, I'm gonna talk about something really cool. And I picked Lynn Jones's update article this month because this is super interesting to me. And I feel like you talk about being in the know. We as beekeepers, we really have to pay attention to what's going on in our hives. And one thing is our bugs that are bugging our bug, other than Varroa. And the yellow-legged hornet is in the news. If it's not in your news, it's in the news feed on Facebook, it's on Instagram, and it's in a lot of scientific news. And that means it's important to us, right? Because it is affecting our honeybees. And I don't know whether we're going to have a problem with it or not, but let's talk about it a little bit. So this I'm gonna call it a hornet because that's what they call it. It's the yellow-legged hornet. I'm not very good at pronouncing its whatever you call it, the scientific name. So I'm just gonna call it yellow-legged hornet. It's from Southeast Asia, and Europe has had this this hornet for over a decade, which is kind of to our benefit. And I'll talk to you about that in here in just a second. Asian honeybees don't have a problem with it, but our European honeybees do. Our bees don't have the method. They haven't kind of grown up with it, so to speak. They've not adapted to combating the hornet in their messing with their hives. So it's a real problem over here. Well, in September of 2023, I'm gonna get to my notes here because I don't want to miss anything. September of 2023, it was spotted, located in Savannah, Georgia. And this was very disturbing. It got a lot of attention, and that's probably where most of you that have heard of it heard about it, was the end of last year. It was found in a beekeeper's colony, which they discovered 2 nests actually, and locally they were suspicious that there was more. Logically, you can imagine. I mean, when you see one, if you see one, it's kind of like varroa mites. If you see one, you've got to believe there's more, right? Well, the same applies for this hornet. So let's get a little background on it. They don't overwinter as a colony like our bees do. The queen starts a new nest each year. And I want to talk to you I've got some notes. See, I've numbered them and got them highlighted. I want to make sure I keep up with it. So they can spread over great distances because queens are what's left, and they overwinter in the soil in ornamental plants. And those plants are shipped via nurseries back and forth across the world, really. And so that's what they suspect is how they got it from France, European country, from France, when we found it in Savannah, Georgia. Not real reassuring because we continue to move plants around, right? And if it's only the queen that is overwintering, then that's something that could slip by us easily, right? It's something that we're not particularly seeing right in front of our face. I want to point out this diagram, and this is in Lynn's article. Number 1 is the yellow-legged hornet. And just to point out, I didn't do all that. So what number is it? Number 6 is the murder hornet. Number 6 is the murder hornet, and number 1 is the yellow-legged hornet. And just to put it in perspective, number 2 is the wasp, yellow wasp that we deal with all the time. Look how tiny it is compared to the yellow-legged hornet, and especially the murder hornet. The northern giant hornet's the technical name. We call it the murder hornet. So number 4, it preys on honeybees to feed their young. So it's kind of like carnivorous, right? And they engage in hawking. What hawking is getting in front of a hive, and they just like a like a helicopter, they hover in front of the hive, and any bee coming out or any bee coming in, they're cutting their heads off and taking it back to their nest to feed their young. It's literally just food source. So in that act, it's paralyzing the colony because our honeybees, they're afraid to exit because they're going to get killed, or they're afraid to enter because they're going to get killed by these hornets. So it's literally just a lessening over time because we can't forage, we can't exit, we can't enter. It's just a shrinking of our colonies because of this hawking action. It's incredible, truly incredible. All right, so number 5, European beekeepers have been through this, so it's very helpful. And I will tell you that is absolutely very helpful. I've talked to a couple of those and listened to a lot of videos, and what they've gone through over the last decade is really and truly to our benefit. The trapping methods that they've developed is truly making a big difference in how well they're being able to combat it, and no doubt how we'll have to deal with it. We call that a bonus. We'll take their knowledge, right? We'll take their knowledge. When's the last thing I want to do? So the takeaway, awareness and education. I wanted to read you the update, and Lynn Jones sent me this, so I feel like it's as close as we can get at the moment. The latest amount of these yellow-legged hornets that have been found, total traps deployed from the onset of finding them till October 24th of this year. So just the other day, 1,171 traps have been put out. Hornets found October 1st through October 24th, 197. Kind of makes you cringe, doesn't it? Nests found and eradicated October 11th through October 24th, four nests. So we're seeing more hornets than we're actually finding their nest. That makes sense, right? You can see the bug flying around, but you can't find its nest. Total nests found and eradicated from August of 23, well, would have been September of 23 to October 24th, 45 nests have been found and eradicated. That's a lot, and that makes me feel good that they've eradicated them, but how many does that mean we haven't seen? Not trying to put fear in you, but it's real, so we need to know about it as beekeepers. And the last thing I want to say, January through October of this year, they have found 4 embryo nests, 3 primary nests, and 33 secondary nests, totaling the 40. That's pretty interesting, and 5 secondary nests through August and December of last year. Pretty darn interesting, if you ask me. I really want us all to kind of stay up on this. I've got Lynn looking into some other aspects of things. Just so you know, since I've said murder hornet a couple of times, the number 6, bonus on that, nothing has been spotted since 2021 was the last time murder hornet was spotted. So we feel like we got ahead of that one really quick. The yellow-legged hornet, who knows? We're safe in Texas and some of the other parts of or most of the other parts of the United States, but the East Coast, I expect that we'll be hearing a little more about that as time goes on. So I want y'all to go in and read Lynn's article. It's already up on the website under yellow-legged hornet. It's just super great information that we really need to pay attention to as beekeepers, because we need to know what to look for, right? Awareness and education. That's all I got.
That's great, Sherry. Thank you so much for that update. And yeah, I will mention just from this is a topic that's certainly going around in the commercial beekeeping world as well. There's a lot of talk around the yellow-legged hornet, what we should be doing about it, what efforts are being done to contain it. So it's a pretty hot topic right now that we'll certainly keep you updated on. And hopefully it doesn't spread too much more and it becomes just a local regional pest, but to be determined. Quick thing before we jump out in the bee yard. I think this is one of my last things before we go to the bee yard. Is if you need to take a beginning beekeeping class or have a friend that wants to, love to see you in one of our stores or on our virtual class. So now the great chance to start signing up, because our early in the year dates fill up pretty quickly for January through March. So now is a great time to refresh your knowledge if it's been a minute since you've taken a class, or if you've got a friend that wants to get into beekeeping. we'd love to introduce them to this addicting, wonderful world of beekeeping. So, all right, let's jump out into the bee yard and check out what the bees are doing. And I've got it. I'm filmed in a couple different locations, so you'll see me jump around a little bit. But let's hop on out there and see what's happening.
Hey friends, welcome to November. It's hard to believe it's November, especially because it's still pretty warm outside. It's like 75 degrees out here right now, which pretty toasty for getting in towards mid-November. And it's been pretty warm pretty consistently. So the challenging thing I'm looking at with our hives today, and that I'm really seeing almost nationwide, is I mean, we're in a pretty severe drought across the majority of the country right now. I mean, I know where I am in North Texas, we just a couple days ago got our first good rains that we've had in a very long time. You look at the US drought map, which we'll look at later tonight, it's pretty terrible. And so I'm paying really close attention because we kind of have a double whammy this year. We have warm weather, so the bees are still rearing a lot of brood in much of the country. And then we have really poor fall flow conditions. So the bees are eating a lot of food because there's still a lot of brood, and they aren't bringing much of anything in. And so, more so than normal, we're paying closer attention to our food. The bees are not bringing in high quality pollen in most cases. In some areas, they are bringing in a lot of pollen, but the quality isn't very good. And so, this is one of those classic years where feeding pollen patties starting back in like September, August or September, when we really recommended it, is so important, because back in August, we couldn't tell what kind of a fall we were going to have. If you have a great fall flow, you might not need to feed pollen patties. But when you start shaping up into a really bad drought and a poor pollen flow and a poor nectar flow, that's when having fed that pollen substitute all along is going to put your hive miles ahead, because they've had the nutrients they need to raise sufficient baby bees for the winter. So, all that to say, food is really important right now. You can still, if you still have brood in the hive, you can keep feeding pollen patties. If your hive doesn't have enough food stores, which we'll talk about later tonight, you've got to feed. While it's still warm outside, um, you can still feed. So while it's still, in the 70s outside, get some feed on the bees before it's too late. So we'll focus on that tonight. And before this bee stings me in the face, I'm going to put my veil on and let's jump out into the bee yard. Hey friends, Blake here. I've gone from a few hives in my backyard to over 30,000 hives over the past several years. And we're going to talk a little bit today about how to store honeycomb. Now, obviously, if you're maintaining 30,000 hives, you're going to have entire warehouses dedicated to storing comb. But in these videos, I try to talk a little bit more about how to take care of a few hives in your backyard based on the lessons I've learned managing anywhere from 2 to 30,000. There's a couple different ways to store comb, but today I'm going to focus on storing comb in the open air, so open air comb storage. Now, you can use wax moth crystals or sertan. We have other videos on how to store indoors using sertan or wax moth crystals. But a common way is to just simply store your comb outdoors, in an area like this. So this is we've got a covered roof, so that's important. You don't want rain getting on your comb. You don't want your comb to ever get wet. But if you have kind of an open air area, so it could be maybe a back porch, or a shed with just a roof, to where you're getting airflow and sunlight, you can just store your comb in that building, because wax moths do not like open air and they do not like sunlight. And so if you've got a box of comb like this, you can just set up boxes of comb vertically. So you want them to be vertical, and then you want to use your hive tool and break those frames apart, so you've got some good spacing between all of your frames, so that air and sunlight can make it between all of your frames. And then you can stack up, 3 or 4 boxes high and long rows of boxes like I've got here. And as long as you've got wind and airflow around them and you've got sunlight, you typically won't see a big wax moth infestation. Now, if you're doing this in, July I probably wouldn't go with this method. But here we are late in the fall, and once you start getting nighttime temperatures below freezing, as long as these boxes are in an area where they're also going to be below freezing, wax moths can't survive. So, if you're below freezing and the boxes are getting below freezing, you can store them anywhere, and wax moths are not going to be a problem. But in the fall, when daytime temperatures or nighttime temperatures rather, still aren't quite to freezing, this open air concept works really, really well to keep the wax moths at bay. You do want to monitor them, come check them, maybe once a week and make sure there isn't a wax moth problem. But typically this open air concept works pretty well for just a small handful of supers rather than having to put them in wax moth crystals or spray them with Sertan. This hive, I've got to admit, when I come into the bee yard, our teaching bee yard here, and I see a problem, I get a little bit excited. As a beekeeper, I shouldn't, because I don't want to see problems. But when I do see problems, I'm like, yes, I get to make a video about a problem and illustrate it. Because if I were a really hardcore educator, I would probably create problems and show them to you guys. But I can't make myself, I just can't bring myself to make a hive become a problem or create a problem for the sake of the bees. So I always try to find real organic problems so I can illustrate them to you guys. So it's almost mid-November, and as soon as I walked into this yard, um, I knew something's going on here. Look at the level of activity on this hive. A lot of activity. Now, if we had had a week-long cold spell where the bees weren't flying and this was the first bright sunny day and all the bees in this yard were flying like crazy, they're just getting out and stretching their legs after they've been cooped up in the cold. Or if this were springtime, and I have a bunch of new baby bees emerging, I might expect to see some intense flight activity. But a couple things concerned me about this hive. Number one, there's a lot of erratic behavior. It's not just peacefully going in and out. The buzzing is pretty loud. When a beehive is just peacefully coming in, or the bees are just peacefully coming in and out in a normal situation, the buzzing isn't that loud. The buzzing's really loud, and then look, I've got this little crack up here, and all these bees are kind of coming and going from this crack in addition to the entrance. That tells me that this hive is probably being robbed. It's being robbed out. Another thing I look at, and I'll show you a little closer with the camera, is I look at what are other hives doing in the bee yard. So when I look at this hive, there is some flight, but not a lot. And every beehive in this yard is like this one. Just a little bit of flight, cooler day, low 70s, not a lot of flight. But when I look at this guy, the flight is off the charts. And you can see the couple of things. The activity is really high. The buzzing is loud. I don't know if you can hear it or not. Look at all the debris. Look how dirty the front of this hive is. These little specks of wax and propolis. That's a clue to me that there's some robbing going on when I start seeing debris on the front. You can see the crack here. Bees are coming and going. Now, this isn't crazy extreme robbing behavior. It's not great, but I've certainly seen robbing behavior way more extreme than this. But the fact that none of the other hives are exhibiting this behavior, I've got bees all in these cracks, I've got debris on the front door, tells me that, yeah, something is not right in this hive. So let's take a quick look and inside this hive and see what is going on. Now, a quick look is going to tell me if this is a hive that I can save or if it's too far gone. Now, what I'm looking at, and apologies as I shift this camera around, but I want you to see what I see in this hive way more than I want you to see my face. So I am positioning this so that when I open up this hive, you're going to see what I'm going to see. Because if this hive is full of robber bees, I'm really not going to be able to save it. So when I open up this hive, I look quickly. Okay, I see very few bees that belong in here. It's not like their hive is full of bees. And I'm just seeing bees coming and going, robbing this hive out. I'm not seeing any bees up in this top box. It's basically empty except for robber bees. When I go down below, nothing but robber bees. So you can see there's no brood. All the bees up here, they're just eating that honey. So this hive is long gone. Uh, I've got a little bit of brood, but it's not much. It's very spotty. Again, all robber bees. The bees that lived here are long gone at this point, and this hive is really just being robbed out. So there is nothing I can do at this point to save it. It's just being robbed, and the fact that there is so little brood in this hive, I mean, this is the only frame right here that just had a tiny bit of brood on it, tells me this hive was really weak. And I know for a fact, because I did check it not long ago, this was a really weak hive. And so this hive died, and it's now just being robbed out. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to let the bees rob this out, um, and I'm actually going to speed them up a little bit. I'm going to take the lid off of this hive and leave the bottom box like that. I'm going to set this box up on end like this, and I'm going to leave it in this position for a couple of days so that those robber bees can go ahead and finish what they started and rob out all that honey. And that way the rest of the bees in this bee yard are going to have something to eat, or something to forage on. And then once the bees have robbed all this honey out of this top box and this bottom box, then I'll take this comb and I'll store it for the winter. Um, so if the situation in which I would have tried to save this hive, if I had opened up this hive and there were still, a box full of bees down here, and a lot of brood, and they were still just trying to defend this hive, then I would have put an entrance reducer on. Um, I would have put an entrance reducer on. I would have gotten a spare lid, and I would have set it just like that across the entrance so that the robber bees no longer can tell where the entrance is, but the foragers that belong here will fly back behind this lid. And that would have really slowed down the robbers. But in this particular case, there was really nothing to save. Let's talk a little bit about fire ants. If you live anywhere in the southern US, you have to deal with fire ants. And I was out here and I noticed this hive. We've got a fire ant mound right here, right by this, oh, well, all around this hive stand, really. And you can see, of course, if you're from the south, you know exactly what this looks like. There's the fire ants. Now, a lot of new beekeepers are really concerned about fire ants. They worry, are they going to hurt my bees? Are they going to take the honey out of a hive? What should I do to kill them? The good news is they don't really bother a beehive much. I mean, this is the second hive in this apiary that has a fire ant mound right around it somewhere. They aren't bothering the bees at all. What they do bother is us as the beekeeper. So it's helpful to treat them and kill them because we don't want them all over us as we keep the bees. But I've seen, commercially, I've seen fire ant mounds, built up as high as the lid on a beehive, and they're not bothering the bees at all. A good hive can easily defend their hive. You'll actually see a fire ant crawl onto the entrance of a hive, and the bees will run up and fan their wings and blow the ant off. So if a hive is dead or basically dead, occasionally, yeah, I'll see the fire ants eat a little bit of the honey. But in general, they seem to be more attracted to, uh, the shelter that a hive provides, getting up underneath it to shelter them from the rain. So not really a major pest when it comes to honeybees. Now, for commercial beekeepers, if us commercial beekeepers, we're sending our bees out to California to pollinate almonds, and they inspect the hives at the border, and they don't want more fire ants in the state. And so we actually have to be really careful as commercial beekeepers to not let fire ants get on our loads of bees when they're going to California. But that's not a concern to you as a small-scale beekeeper. If you do want to treat and kill them, I would use boiling water. Pour about a gallon or two of boiling water onto the fire ant mound. Should kill it off pretty quickly, and you're not worried about any chemicals or pesticides getting around your hive. You can use a chemical or pesticide, just apply it at night and when it's not windy, because you don't want any of that to get into the hive. And I wouldn't use a dust that might be able to blow into the hive. I would use something that's penetrated into that fire ant mound, so there's no risk of it affecting and getting into your bees. So some sort of a granule that goes inside the hive, or inside, excuse me, not inside the hive, inside the fire ant mound works, or some sort of natural organic treatment. Even those I would apply at night, so there's no risk of them getting into the beehive and hurting the hive. But in general, fire ants are way more of a pest to you than they are your bees, so that is good news. Let's talk a little bit about losses. Now, it's so discouraging to talk about losses, and I can honestly say in my 20 plus years of keeping bees, I have lost thousands and thousands and thousands of beehives. And it's a part of the game, and it's a part of the journey when it comes to beekeeping. And even though it's discouraging, I want to reassure you that everybody loses beehives. This is a beehive that we just lost. It's in our teaching apiary here. I came out, it was being robbed out, went through it. There was basically no brood. It was really weak on the last visit, and this time it's being robbed out by bees. And so that happens, and we usually see this happening in the fall and winter when those bees finally give up, finally die off. I want to bring some perspective, hopefully, to your winter losses or your fall losses. The average annual loss rate in the US right now is almost 50%. And that's true even of commercial beekeepers. So guys like me that are running thousands or tens of thousands of beehives, I mean, a good year, great year, I'm losing 30% annually. That's a really good year. There's years where we all lose 60 plus percent, maybe even 70%. I have friends that sometimes have lost 80% of their operation. And losses are just part of it. And some years are better than others, some years are worse than others. The key is there's two key things. One, when you do lose bees, don't give up, don't get discouraged. Save this honeycomb. This is your starter for next year. There is so much value here. If you drop a swarm or a nook or a package of bees into this comb next year, they're going to grow so much faster having all this comb ready to go. The other thing to keep in mind is what matters is what are the rest of your hives like? So the hives that do survive, what condition are they in? Even if you have a 50% loss rate, but your remaining 50% are really strong hives, you can easily split to get back to your previous year's numbers from those remaining 50%. So don't give up. Don't get discouraged. Remember, there's value in your honeycomb. There's value in the hives that are left. Even if you lose all of your bees in your first or second year, which is very normal, by the way, use what you've learned and use the equipment that you have to jumpstart the next year. It takes a number of years to really get the hang of beekeeping and really understand what to do and how to keep bees alive. So don't get too discouraged. Understand that it's completely normal to lose bees. And what matters is, did you learn from it? And did you save your equipment to try again next year?
And there you go, folks. So that is our bee yard segment. Let's jump back into our proverbial classroom and talk about a few things that I didn't get to talk about out in the bee yard. So we're definitely seeing dwindling fall blooms. I mean, everywhere in the country, the blooms are dwindling. You're not seeing a lot of pollen coming in. There are pockets that is this more than others, but for the most part, we're seeing a lot more dead flowers than living. This is something I really want to mention. Yeah, this is the U.S. drought map right now. This is this is rough. I mean, usually we see pockets of drought, but just look how widespread the drought is this fall. I mean, this is basically nationwide. There's far more of the country that's in a drought than not, and varies from mild to moderate to certainly some areas of severe. So we are sitting in a pretty substantial drought, and that is going to have an impact on fall buildup before winter. It could have an impact on spring blooms, but really depends on where in the country you are. Some areas it impacts it more than others. So we're definitely in a drought, and that certainly has an impact. So we're already seeing, the cooler temperatures reduce the amount of brood, which is perfectly normal. That's okay. We expect that. But we're seeing struggling blooms nationwide, and that's leading to really lightweight hives in a lot of regions. So most beekeepers just need to pay a little closer attention than normal as to how much stores their hive has. I've had way more people tell me this year, like, wow, I went out and checked my bees and they were so light. And it's kind of a, yeah, a combination of we're seeing warm weather, so brood rearing is going later, or still in going on in a lot of regions, and we're seeing a drought, which means not as much forage available. So that double whammy is in effect, and so you just really need to pay attention. This is the time of year that bees need to be as nutritionally sound as possible because they're raising that final generation of baby bees that are going to need to survive the winter. So that's super important, along with, of course, making sure you don't have varroa mites. That's the most important thing. But brood dwindle is very, very normal. So this is what I am seeing in my hives. It's what's normal. You know, we see these thick bands. You should see these thick bands of honey around the edges of these frames in your brood nest area, and then an ever shrinking patch of brood in the middle. So, you know, that's normal, that's expected. You should see less and less brood as the bees are kind of shrinking down that brood area, and the queen is laying less and less. Um, Most of my hives, I'm seeing, you know, 2 to 4 frames of brood, and it's getting a little patchy, and it's getting shrunken down, and that's normal. That's what we expect to see. So, what do your bees need to be successful and survive the winter? Well, here's a bit of a breakdown based on where you are in the country. If you're in the southern US, 30 to 40 pounds is usually enough stored syrup or honey to get a beehive successfully through the winter. You know, and that's a strong hive. You know, that's, you know, a deep box or more full of bees. 30 to 40 pounds should do it. So that's, you know, to translate it, that'd be like 3 or 4 deep frames of honey in your bottom box, and then a medium super, you know, that's half to 2/3 full of honey above it. Most of my hives are 2 deep boxes. And so, you know, I'm going for that top deep being, you know, half to 2/3 full of honey, and then, you know, a few good frames of honey in the bottom box. Central US, 50 to 60 pounds of honey or syrup. Northern US, 60 to 80 pounds of syrup. You've got to have mites under 2 per 100 bees. That's critical to be successful. You need at least 5 to 6 frames of bees at a minimum. If you don't have that, you need to think about combining. And then, of course, a healthy queen is important to bring that hive out of hibernation the next year. You know, we talked about feeding a little bit, but you know, the goal is to just maintain your stores in the second box throughout the winter. So, you know, if your hive has less than 30 to 40 pounds, or adjust that depending on where you are in the country. If you're central, you need more like 60, northern, more like 80. You know, I'm feeding 2 to 1 syrup, a gallon per week if my bees don't have enough food. Um, Caveat on that, once daytime temperatures are under about 60, those bees are not going to take syrup. And like I mentioned in the video, you've got to switch to stand soft sugar bricks, or you've got to switch to the Ziploc bag or one of those other methods, because bees aren't going to just drink liquid syrup out of a division board feeder or a top feeder once it gets below 60 degrees. Robbing is common in the fall, as you know, we're in a drought, the flowers are already dying. And so, you know, bees can certainly start robbing this time of year, especially when the daytime temperatures are still warm, and there's no forage for them. You can bet they're going to rob, because the best source of forage is other beehives. So, you know, this is a great picture of that illustrates robbing. You know, when you're seeing bees clustered and flying at a frenzy at the edges of the box, the cracks, anywhere they can smell honey, you know, that's a great indicator that robbing is going on. So, you know, robbing is always a concern. You can see this beekeeper did the right thing. They put an entrance reducer on the hive, and that can shrink down the space that the guard bees have to defend. So that's step one, is put an entrance reducer on. You know, the other thing I do if active robbing is occurring is I get a piece of wood or an extra lid, and I lean it up against the front of that hive. So it doesn't block the entrance, but those robbers are going to lose sight of where they were trying to get in. And then they're often not smart enough, the robbers, to fly around that lid to get into the entrance. And so sometimes just a visual block that blocks off wherever they were accessing the hive is enough to slow down robbing. So I block their line of sight from where they were accessing the hive, reduce down the entrance. Pine sol works pretty well, actually. Bees do not like the smell of pine sol. And so if you get a spray bottle with some pine sol in it and lightly spray the cracks where they're trying to get in, you don't want it in the hive, but you can spray the outside of the woodenware. That shuts it down pretty quickly. Um, and then you can also get a sheet and wet it and just cover the hive, except for the entrance, with a wet sheet, and that tends to shut it down as well. The best piece of advice I have for you, though, is to, if you're feeding your hive, is to feed it in the evening, right before dark. And that way, any drips of syrup, etc., the bees clean it up during the night. If you're feed in the morning, then if you feed in the morning, then you're going to have all day long for those robber bees to smell that syrup and try to get in and make a mess. So feed later in the day, uh, and that'll help prevent robbing too. Winter feed options. I'm going to skip most of this because I discussed it out in the bee yard. Stand soft sugar bricks work great. Ziploc bag. Some people get a chicken feeder. I didn't mention that in the video. In the video, I put the Boardman feeder on top of the hive and put the box around it. Some people get a chicken feeder and put it inside that box, fill it full of syrup. I don't like the division board. I don't like the Boardman feeder or the chicken feeder quite as much because the bees still kind of have to crawl up over that lip or into the Boardman feeder. And when it's really cold outside, they don't want to move. I mean, an inch or two on a cold day when they're clustered is asking too much. So what I like about Stan's sugar bricks or the Ziploc bag, even the Ziploc bag, they still have to crawl up and on top of that Ziploc bag, which works. But I mean, the thing I do like about the sugar bricks is that the bees can eat it from the underside. So if that brick is sitting right on top of the cluster, they can just eat it, really, no matter what the temperature is outside. It's that direct injection of food on top of the cluster. I mentioned in the video, but I'm planning on feeding a couple more pounds of pollen substitute through the month of November. And I would say this: if your hive still has brood, and I'm talking maybe a frame of brood or more, then I would keep feeding some pollen sub, because the brood that they're still rearing is what's going to survive the winter. So I would keep feeding some pollen sub as long as you've got brood in your hive. Once we start getting routine freezes and the bees are clustered even during the day, you don't need pollen patties. They're not going to eat them anyway. So we're almost done with pollen patties, but a couple more weeks is probably going to be beneficial if you're in an area that's still warm. Entrance reducers can go on now. If you use entrance reducers, now's the time to put them on. You don't have to use them. A lot of beekeepers don't use them. I don't use them. But if you have a weaker hive or a robbing issue, they can be helpful. It can help prevent some cold wind from blowing into the hive. So it doesn't hurt anything. But if you want to put it on, now's the time. And then with screen bottom boards, the big thing, you don't have to seal it. You just don't want cold wind blowing up underneath the hive and up into the hive. So you just kind of block the sides of your hive stand off so that cold wind can't blow up under the hive. I mean, I know beekeepers in the central US, Colorado and other more central states that they have screen bottom boards on year round. I mean, the bees do pretty well as long as cold wind isn't blowing up under them. If you think of a beehive in a tree, right? I mean, they could be at the top of a hollow tree and they could have 20 feet of dead airspace underneath them, and they do okay. That's because the bees keep the cluster warm, but they're not keeping the whole cavity wherever they are warm. They're just keeping their cluster warm. So having excess space or dead air space or a screen underneath them isn't the end of the world, but you just wouldn't want cold wind blowing up under them all throughout the year. Insulating hives. So I've just got to touch on this because it comes up every year. We get a lot of questions. Should I insulate my hive? Should I wrap my hive? I want to just give you some guiding principles here. The key to remember, the most important thing is that moisture is worse than cold for bees. Hives need to breathe to get moisture out of the hive. Remember, when bees are clustering, they're still keeping that cluster hot. I mean, it can be 70 to 90 degrees in the middle of that cluster. So you've got this hot mass, and then you've got really cold air a couple inches away inside the hive. And so that hot and that cold creates moisture, right? It creates condensation. And so you're going to have condensation build up on the underside of the lid in your hive. Some of that air needs to vent out in order to get the moisture out of the hive. And if you have sealed up your hive completely, that moisture can't escape. And so you're going to have this wet rain raining down on your bees all winter long, and that kills the hive really quickly. So you wouldn't want to seal up a hive. I mean, because it's going to create a moisture problem. So you can tilt the hive forward a little bit, so you can lift up the backside of the hive, an inch or so that any condensation that does build up on the lid, it's not just raining straight down on the cluster. It's running down the lid, and then running down the inside of the front of the hive and out the front door. That's not a bad way to keep the moisture from falling just straight down. It just kind of runs and then stays off the bees. The other thing is, these are all good examples of ways to insulate hives. Of course, the Apimaye hive or the Hive IQ, I like those better than any sort of a wrap. They're easier, but they're also insulated naturally, and they naturally have vent at the right places. And so you don't have to worry about that condensation. And it's kind of the best of both worlds. You've got this insulated hive and you've got vents built in. This upper right picture, not a bad idea. This person has a cold north wind that always blows from this one direction. And so they just kind of wrapped half of that hive just to keep the cold northern wind from always penetrating through the cracks in the hive. And that's perfectly fine. It's still going to vent plenty. It's more of a wind block. The picture on the left, if you are going to wrap hives, this is the way to do it. You can see that the lid is not wrapped, nor is the bottom board. So they've just wrapped around the boxes. And so they should have a slight crack underneath that lid so that the moisture can vent out, and it's not so sealed that that moisture can't escape. So I'll come back to that. I got my slides out of order here. So should you insulate? So I built this little chart today, and this is my opinion, but it's based on talking to a lot of beekeepers in a lot of regions. So you can see this bottom area, these white lines are kind of dividing. The bottom area, I think it's completely unnecessary to wrap hives or insulate hives. Now, Apimaye and Hive IQ, great products, because this bottom area where it says no gets really hot in the summer, and those insulated hives are actually more helpful in the summer than the winter, because the bees can keep the hive cooler. This middle section basically means, yes, you can insulate it. Is it necessary? Probably not. You can, but not critical. And then this upper area where you've got the purples, yeah, you probably it's going to be helpful to do some form of insulating. Not critical. I still know people up in these regions that successfully overwinter bees without any insulation. I would say if you are in the dark purples, it is tough to keep bees alive. You probably really need to insulate and do some more stuff in the dark purples. But these lighter purples, yeah, it's not going to hurt. I'd probably still do it if I was in this darker purple area. So there's a Southern boy's opinion on insulating. I do actually have a lot of bees up in these purple areas too, though. So I've got a little bit of experience in it. So that's it on insulating bees. Winter flight. So I want to talk about this. This is especially relevant for the beekeepers in the southern half of the U.S. This video is, a good representation of, um, what we often see in the wintertime. This is taken in the dead of the winter, everything's dead, but you get these warm days in the 50s or 60s, and the bees start flying like crazy. And everywhere in the US, you get usually a bright sunny day or two, and the bees start flying, and that's okay. The bees It's good for the bees occasionally to do what we call break cluster, where it's warm enough that the cluster kind of breaks. Some of the bees come out, they go to the restroom. The cluster can kind of reform in a different area of the hive where there's more honey. So that's a good and healthy thing. A misconception, I think, in beekeeping, though, is that, uh, cold is bad for bees. So the warmer my bees stay, the warmer the climate is, the better. It's not necessarily true. I've seen plenty of bees in the wintertime in Florida where it's 75 or 80 degrees crash and die. So it's good for the bees to shut down. It's good for the bees to go broodless. The queen gets a break. It reduces the varroa mite levels. It's good for a hive to shut down in the wintertime, to cluster for a few months or more, and that's a healthy part of a hive's natural rhythm. When we get summertime or winter times in the south, especially where it stays really warm and you're getting like day after day after day of bee flight, I don't like to see that, because what happens is the bees are coming out foraging. There's nothing for them to forage on because everything's dead, and so they're just wearing themselves out. They're burning through their reserves, they're wearing out their wings, doing nothing. So when we have a really warm winter, it's not much you can do about it other than, pay attention to food stores. You might need to feed a little bit more through the winter if it's a hot winter and the bees are out there foraging more. But I say all that to maybe reassure you a little bit that when you get a cold winter, and the bees are clustered, that's a good thing. That's not a problem. When we get these, weeks below freezing and the bees can't move, that's not a good thing either. But bees out foraging every day isn't a good thing either. So November population check. So this is what I'm usually doing when I'm checking bees this time of year, is just checking on population. And I wanted to show you a few pictures here. This is a good healthy cluster. This is a deep box. You can kind of see between the frames. I would say this hive is one, two, three, four, five, six, probably seven frames of bees, 6 to 7 really good frames of bees. That's a good healthy hive. As soon as I take off the lid or as soon as I break boxes apart, I'm looking before I smoke them to see what the population is. I feel good about that hive. These are two deep boxes looking at them from the underside, and this is usually looking at it from the underside is a more accurate representation of population, because looking down from the top, isn't it's harder to see between those frames. So if you look at it from the underside, it's easier to actually count which frames are covered in bees. So what's interesting is, let me see, let me orient myself here. This picture on the right, it really is more like one, two, three, four, five, maybe 5.5 frames of bees. This is the same box, so it looks like there's more bees in this picture, but when you look at the bottom, there's really not as many. So if you're trying to get a really accurate picture of your bee population, counting it from the underside of the box gives you a little bit better picture. You don't have to do it. You don't have to break all your boxes apart and look from the underside, unless you really want to. So if your hive is, less than 3 or 4 frames of bees this time of year, probably not going to survive the winter. And so you can combine it with another hive. So this picture is a good representation of that. You've got maybe 2 frames of bees, if you were to stretch them out across frames. Pretty weak hive. Oops. It's not going to make the winter. Now, if this was January, I'd probably just leave them be because they're going to start growing soon, or February, and maybe they'll pull through. But November, a hive this small, not going to make it. So before I combine it with another hive, here are some things I'm paying attention to. Number one is the temperature. If I'm looking at a hive and it's 38 degrees or 45 degrees and they're clustered really tightly, I'm not going to judge a hive's population when it's that cold. Because I've seen a good 8 frame hive, 8 frames of bees, look like 4 frames of bees, if it's really cold outside. They're clustered so tightly. So you want to be checking, when it's warm outside, it's bright, sunny, 65 to 75 degrees. And that gives you, they're not clustered, and that's going to give you more accurate representation of what the actual population is. So don't make these decisions when it's really cold or really early in the morning or late in the day when it's chilly. When you're counting frames of bees, total all the frames of bees in all the boxes. So when I say if it's 3 or 4 frames of bees, it's not going to make it. That means if you were to combine all the bees in all the boxes, it shouldn't be over 3 to 4 frames. Methods of combining, there's all different methods. We've got lots of YouTube videos on our channel about combining and how to do that. But the most common method is you get a sheet of newspaper, you put it on top of a stronger hive, and then you set this weaker box of bees on top, and you let them chew through the newspaper. Usually you would kill the queen in the weakest hive because she's more likely to be deficient. And so you would kill the queen in the weakest hive. Most beekeepers do what I would call a dirty combination, which is one of two things. Um, well, I'll tell you what a lot of beekeepers do, and then I'll tell you what most commercial beekeepers do, and you can decide what you want to do. The more common than not, beekeepers just stack the two boxes together. So they open the lid on a stronger hive and they just set this whole weaker hive right on top. There's way more bees in the strong hive. The odds are they're going to find and kill that queen in the weaker hive because they don't recognize her. Um, and yeah, there'll be a little bit of fighting. You might have a few dozen bees fight and die. But the vast majority of bees are just going to integrate quickly into the same hive. And that's way easier than messing with newspaper and coming back and seeing if they chewed through it and pulling off the newspaper. Just stick them together. What most commercial beekeepers do, I'm not saying that's always the right thing to do, but they do it for a reason. Uh, and what I often do is I would pull these 4 frames out of this weak hive that have bees all over it, and I would just shake the bees in the heat of the day, middle of the day. I would just shake all those bees off those frames, and then I would take all that equipment and store it. So you want to protect the comb because that's the most valuable thing, and that you can easily restart this hive next year with a swarm, a milk, or a package. That comb is where the gold is. But I would just shake the bees out in my bee yard, and those bees are all just pretty much going to drift equally to all the other hives in my bee yard. If that queen tries to fly into another hive, the guard bees are probably going to kill her. So I don't have to worry about her integrating with another hive. But the forager bees and all the worker bees are just going to drift into other hives in my bee yard. It's really easy, really quick, really easy. So that's what I usually do to get rid of a weaker hive like this. So those bees aren't wasted. They're just gonna pick which hive they want to integrate into. Here's a picture of a hive that's really on the verge as far as combining. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4 good frames of bees. I would probably reduce this to a single box, and I'd probably just see if they can make it. I'd probably reduce it to a single story hive and see if they could pull through the winter. And it can be painful doing this. I mean, this is the time of year. This was a picture I took a couple of years ago, where like half of the beehives, were no good. And this is the time of year where, I hear from so many beekeepers say, hey, my bees look good all summer long. And now they're tiny little knots of bees or they're dead or, and we often blame it on, oh, it must have gotten cold. And the reality is in most cases, it was a varroa mite problem back in July and August that got out of control. And yes, there were lots of bees, but it was on a downhill spiral. Usually when we're seeing dead hives or dying hives or shrinking hives this time of year, it points back to a problem over the summer in most cases. And as it gets cold, we start seeing the results of those past issues. I'm going to skip that slide because we talked I'm going to touch on this briefly. When to remove boxes. You know, my general rule of thumb is I check what the honey stores are like in the boxes below. I check what the bee population is. I'm not deciding to remove boxes when it's 30 degrees. So when I'm doing an inspection on a warm, sunny day, if I have a box that has 25% or less full of bees, and I have plenty of honey stores in lower boxes, then I'm going to pull that box off. So now, if my lower boxes don't have all the honey that they need to overwinter, and that top box is full of honey, just not a lot of bees, I'm still going to leave it because that cluster will move up throughout the winter. But if my top box doesn't have much honey in it and just hardly has any bees in it, now's a good time of year to go ahead and just shake the bees out of it and then store it for next year. If you're queenless, that should say November. If you're queenless in November, then I would combine it with another hive. Sorry, this was a slide that got left in from October, but in November, I'm going to combine it with another hive, or just shake all the bees out and let them find a way to a new hive. Winter inspections, I talked about that in the video a little bit. Sorry, my slides keep bouncing around. When I am looking at hives in November, I'm looking for brood and eggs. I don't necessarily expect to see brood and eggs in all of my hives. Um, you're going to have a lot of the weaker hives start really shrinking down to very little. Checking for pollen stores, pollen patty consumption, population, honey stores. These are all things I'm just checking for when I'm doing an inspection in November. When to look at a hive in the winter and fall, or I should say, how long to look at a hive. This is kind of the chart I follow. If it's above 32 degrees, um, I'm usually if it's 32 degrees, um, let me back up. If it's below 32 degrees, I tend to not look. So if it's below 32, I try not to go out and check my hive and open it up. If it's above 32 but below 40, so if it's 32 to 40 degrees, um, I'll look at it, but less than a minute, and I'm not pulling frames out. If it's sunny and above 40 degrees, I might spend a couple minutes and I might pull out a frame or two. If it's 50 degrees and sunny or above, then I'll pull out several frames and do whatever I need. I'm usually doing inspections in the heat of the day, so I don't want to do it right at dark because I want to give that hive time to reform its cluster, and any straggler bees that may have fallen out of the hive during the inspection, I want to give them time to come back into the hive. So, heat of the day is when I'm doing inspections, and it's always better to look at a hive than not. I mean, bees handle the cold quite well. So if you're worried about starvation or you need to add a sugar brick in, do it. Even if it's cold, just do it. Just be fast. Because you are not going to kill a hive by cracking the boxes apart and taking a quick look. I mean, I've cracked boxes apart and looked at hundreds of beehives when there's snow on the ground because I had to because I needed something, and it didn't kill a single one of them. So it's more dangerous not to look than it is to ignore them because you're afraid of getting them too cold. And I've always have to describe this picture and what's going on here. This was early March one year, and we were doing splits, and it was crazy cold. I think it was freezing or below. But we had all these queen cells and queens coming in, so we had to get these splits done. And we got this pop-up tent, and we have this little propane heater you can see down here in the bottom, and it's blasting heat. And we would pick up this tent and move it over a pallet of bees and blast that propane heater, and we would do our split, put the hive back together, and then move on, pick it up, move on to the next pallet. And it worked incredibly well. It wouldn't, that was back when I only had a few thousand hives. It wouldn't work now, but with many thousands, but it worked pretty well, and it kept the bees nice and warm as we were doing all these splits. And then you can see the bees that flew out they would fly out of the tent and they go, oh man, this is cold, and then they would all cluster together up at the top of the tent. So whenever we had a split that didn't get enough bees, we would go to the outside of the tent and scoop up a bunch with a bucket and then dump them in the split that needed extra bees, which kind of worked out really perfectly. And but and it was much nicer for the beekeeper. We were splitting, indoors at 65 degrees instead of at a drizzly 30 degrees. So anyway, fun spring. How often to inspect? 2 times a month, November through January, is more than sufficient. Once the bees start clustering, even once a month, and that's often just lifting up on the back of the hive to see what the weight's like, maybe quickly cracking the boxes apart to make sure population's good, maybe lifting up the lid to see if you need to add a sugar brick. But they can be, 30-second inspections that are just a quick glance at the hive. So, in the few minutes we've got left, I've got just a series of pictures here, and this is just kind of fun that address, what happened to these hives. This is the time. This is the what happened time of year where it's like, okay, I'm looking at this problem. My bees died. What went wrong? And there are always clues when you look at what's left of a beehive that can help you understand why it died. So, when I look at a frame like this, there are a lot of clues here. Number one, this honey has been robbed out. So when you see those jagged edges around the corners, um, the robber bees have torn open those cells and robbed out those cells. So this hive could have been robbed out. They did have some brood at the time they died, so it could have just been a really small, weak hive, and they were robbed out because you can see there's no honey stores. So that's a good clue. There aren't any dead bees inside the hive. So that tells me they didn't freeze to death. If they froze, there would actually be the bees still in the hive, clustered on that frame, but dead and frozen. So no adult bees. I've got some brood, so they weren't queenless. And everything's robbed out. I'm typically going to say that this hive probably, for some reason, really shrunk down in size in the fall and then couldn't fight away robber bees. And the robber bees just came in and took everything. And what bees were left in this hive just abandoned ship and went into other hives. This frame, this is more common to see in the spring, but this is a drone layer or a queen that ran out of sperm, and now she is just laying drones, which is a little more likely because this is actually a really good pattern and a lot of drone brood, and you can see how bumpy it is. It's not that kind of nice flat worker bee brood. This is really bumpy and bullet shaped cells. I don't know why my slides keep bouncing back like that. Um, and so, this is what happens when a queen gets too old and runs out of sperm. And so that's why we requeen every year. That's why I recommend requeening every year, because even if your queen's a year old or 18 months old and still looks good, a month later she could be out of sperm and laying, a beautiful pattern of drones. So it's hard, if not impossible, to save a hive once it gets to this point. So requeening every year, pretty important. If you're an experienced beekeeper, you know just what this is. This is more of a springtime issue too, but this is chalk brood. So these little white mummies all over the bottom board, that's called chalk brood. And it's a fungus that typically infects hives when it is a wet spring or really wet conditions. Usually, once the temperatures heat up a bit and it gets drier, it often goes away on its own. This is a hive that went queenless. If you see it's right here in the middle. This is a queen cell that if you see these left over in the hive, your hive went queenless. And if you see the side of it chewed open like this, that means that another queen emerged first, chewed open the side, and stung the queen in it to death. So it doesn't mean you don't have a queen. It just means this one didn't hatch first, and she was stung by a competing queen. If the side isn't torn open and the bottom or the top is chewed open, that means she did hatch out of it. So I always, when I have a hive that dies, I always look for these because if I see these in a hive, it tells me that that hive probably died because they went queenless. They raised their own queen, but it wasn't fast enough, or the population wasn't sufficient, and they died anyway. So when I have a dead hive and I have these queen cells all over the place, or even a couple of them, 90% of the time it tells me queenlessness was the culprit, and the new queen wasn't raised fast enough. Okay, I'm going to skip over those. Oops, a little too far. So yeah, that is all I've got for the month of November. I'm excited to talk bees in December. Hopefully, we all get some rain, and you get out and check your bees and do the final preparation before winter hits. Um, Thanks for taking the time to watch this. I know I'm always amazed that so many people, for an hour to an hour and a half, sit through a bee presentation every month. So I'm humbled and thankful that you enjoy it, and that you get enough value out of this to spend an hour to an hour and a half every month with me. And I appreciate the opportunity to share some lessons I've learned. So with that, have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I will see you in early December when we talk about the final month of winter management. And then in January, we'll start talking bees again. It'll be time to ramp up. So again, have a great Thanksgiving, and I'll see you in a month.